So, good morning, class. Good morning, good morning.
Um,
So, Monday morning, sana lahat is okay. So,
Mabalak.
yes, December na, kasi magpapasko na. So, last 2 weeks na lang tayo before the vacation. So, I'll be discussing muna the object-oriented programming before the reporting. So, topic included the introduction to object-oriented programming, the history of object programming in PHP, procedural versus OO coding system, style, benefits of object-oriented programming, some basic OO terms, and then the general coding conventions. So the intended learning outcomes, after reading and analyzing this chapter, you should be able to understand object-oriented programming and how it fits for PHP, and then learn some benefits over procedural and functional programming. So yung mga naunang nag-program tayo before, those are all procedural. So what is object-oriented programming versus procedural programming? So, kompleto na sila. So, PHP is one of the most popular scripting language of the couple of years. So, almost 60% of web servers are running on Apache with PHP. So, it is so popular that millions of websites and web applications are developed every month using PHP. Actually, yung very famous nga na Facebook is gawa siya sa PHP. So PHP started its journey as a simple replacement for Perl. And in few years, it became tremendously popular and powerful. So that language itself is closely similar to ANSI, yung C language. Yan. And then, one of the reasons why PHP became so popular is its short learning curve. Learning PHP is not a big job, especially if you are familiar with the syntax of Java or C language. As writing PHP scripts is easy, anyone can write PHP code without following conventions and mixing presentation layers with business logics. Sabi nga nila yung PHP is a loose language. Very loose talaga siya. Because there are no strict coding convention followed in PHP. So over the years, as project gets bigger, it can turn into an unimaginable demon daw siya. So object-oriented programming is a good programming practice to create manageable objects more easily. And procedural programming means writing code without objects. Procedural programming consists of codes with or without routine. So yung procedural, hindi mo kailangan gumamit ng object. Code ka lang ng code, ganun. Pero pagdating na sa object-oriented, you really need to use objects because OOP enlightens any language for better coding, for best performance, and for writing very big projects without worrying a lot about managing them. And OOP gives you facilities to create reusable objects that you or other developers can use in their projects without reinventing them again and again. So hindi mo kailangan na paulit-ulit na gagawin because it made of classes and objects. Madali mo na lang siya i-edit. Because OOP removes the hassles and difficulties of writing and managing big application. So yung example natin ng big application is yung PHP, yung Facebook. Yun. So as the same suggests, object-oriented programming or OOPs refers to languages that uses objects in programming. And object-oriented programming aims to implement real-world entities like inheritance, hiding, polymorphism, many more in programming. And the main aim of OOP is to bind together the data and the functions that operate on them so that no other part of the code can access this data except that function. So we had this object-oriented programming concepts. We had the class, the object, data abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, dynamic binding, and then the message passing. So ito yung mga i-discuss ko lang is mga concepts, and bahala na lang kayong magbigay pagdating ng reporting nyo ng mga simple codes. So I want each and every member should present to me simple code. For example, how to create a class, bakit pag na-instantiate si class nagiging object, yung mga ganon. Anong nangyayari pag ginamit mo yung data abstraction? So you need to show me some codes. Yan. So what is a class? So class is a user-defined data type. It consists of data members and member function which can be accessed and used by creating an instance of that class. So it represents the set of properties or methods that are common to all objects of one type. So a class is like a blueprint of an object. Yan, tatandaan niyo yan ha. A class is like a blueprint of an object. And what is an object? An object is a basic unit of object-oriented programming and represents the real-life entities. An object is an instant of a class. When a class is defined, no memory is allocated. But when it is instantiated or an object is created, memory is allocated. O, tandaan nyo din yon. So an object has an identity, a state, and a behavior. So, ibig sabihin yan, each object contains data and code to manipulate the data. So, the object can interact without having to know details of each other's or code. It is sufficient to know the type of message accepted and type of response returned by that certain objects. So, yun yung object natin. Next, we have the data abstraction. Ito, ginagamit yung data abstraction to hide something. Kasi meron yung mga parts ng program that it is needed to be, pwede siyang i-hide. Ayan. So, data abstraction is one of the most essential and important features of object-oriented programming. So, data abstraction refers to providing only essential information about the data to the outside world, hiding the background details or implementation. Data abstraction is hiding. Mag-hide ka ng mga important information. Halimbawa, consider a real-life example of a man driving a car. So, yung marunong mag-drive ng car, they only know how to press the accelerator, how to speed the car, or apply brakes of that car. But, except dun sa mga, tawag dito, may pinag-aralan talaga sa mga makina. Yung mga simple lang na kagaya ko na wala akong alam sa mga makina. Alam ko na pag pinindot ko yung accelerator is bumibilis yung speed niya. Alam ko din yung pag naglagay ako ng gasolina, aandar yung sasakyan. Alam ko din yung paggamit ng brake. Pero yung inner mechanism of that car or yung implementation kung paano gumagana yung accelerator, brake ng isang sasakyan is hindi ko alam. Hindi ko alam kung paano yung pagkakagawa. So that is what we call abstraction. Na kung sino yung mga gumawa or nag-develop nun, is sila lang yung nakakaalam. So that's what we call the abstraction. So in an encapsulation is defined as the wrapping up of data under a single unit. It is the mechanism that binds together code and the data it manipulates. So in an encapsulation, the variables or data of a class are hidden from any other class and can be accessed only through any member function of their class in which they are declared. So yung pwede lang mag-access sa kanila is a member of that function na na-declare. As in encapsulation, the data in a class hidden from other classes. So, ang tawag dyan is data hiding. So, inheritance, di ba? Inheritance, kagaya din sa atin, namamana, yan. Inheritance is a very important pillar of object-oriented programming. So, the capability of a class to derive properties and characteristics from another class is called inheritance. So, example nito, when we write a class, we inherit properties from other classes. So, when we create a class, we do not need to write all the properties and functions again and again. So, this can be inherited from another class that possesses it. Inheritance allows the user to reuse the code whenever possible and reduce its redundancy. Para hindi na alam ko may mga nag-develop na sa inyo yan. Halimbawa, nagkakaroon kasi ng redundancy pag procedural. Ginawa mo tong page na to, but you want to copy everything, i-paste mo ulit dun sa isang link para lalabas din siya. Halimbawa na lang is yung navigation bar yan. Yung navigation bar, you want that to be seen in your next page, in your next page, in your next page. So, nagkakaroon ng redundancy. But if you use inheritance, inherit mo na lang yung mga bagay na yun mas madali, mas konti yung, marireuse mo yung mga codes na yon in a simple way lang. Hindi ka nagagamit ng too much time copying and paste the whole page. Yung ganon. Then we also had this polymorphism. So the word polymorphism means having many forms. In simple words, we can define polymorphism as the ability of a message to be displayed in more than one form. For example nito is a person at the same time can have different characteristics. Yan. Sabihin na natin, ako, I am your teacher, but I am also a mother and a wife, di ba? So, sabihin na natin may characteristic ako as a teacher na pinapakita ko sa inyo. At the same time, I also have those different attitudes or different behaviors na pinapakita ko naman sa pamilya ko or sa other people, sa asawa ko, ganyan. So, that is what we call polymorphism. So, ganun din siya pagdating ng code mo. So, kahit na ginamit natin itong code na to, meron pa rin siya other behavior na pwede mong paggamitan. Depende sa situation or depende kung saang function mo siya gagamitin. So, ganun yung polymorphism. Next is we had this dynamic binding. So in dynamic binding, the code to be executed in response to the function call is decided at runtime. So runtime siya. Pag niraran mo na yung code, yun. Dun mo nakikita yung response ng mga function. So dynamic binding means that the code associated with a given procedure call is not known until the time of that call at runtime. So, ibig sabihin yan, dynamic method binding is, yung advantage niya is, nagagamit siya sa inheritance. Is that sa, halimbawa, yung member ng class D, yan, has all the member of its base of class B. So, meron tayong class D and class B. Yung member ng class D, i-derive niya at yan, ibibig yung member ng, halimbawa, we have A and B. Yan, we have this class A and then we have this class B. Ganyan. Tapos itong si class A, meron siyang mga advantages na gustong i-inherit kay B. Yan. So yung mga laman ni B, pwedeng gamitin ni A. Yan. So magkakaroon niya ng binding. Pero makikita mo na lang yung binding na yon, yung result ng yon in the runtime, pag niran mo na siya. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng binding. So next is message passing. From the word itself, message passing. So message passing simply means that at a very abstract level, the fundamental mechanism of program execution is objects sending each other messages. So the important point is that the name and structure of the message is not necessarily fixed beforehand in the source code and can itself be additional information. So, ibig sabihin niyan, this language implement a limited version of message passing through method calls. So, limited because the set of message that can be sent is limited to the methods declared in a class. So, yung may advantage naman to, the advantage of this approach is that it can be implemented very efficiently and it enables very detailed static code analysis. Tapos, yung real message naman na ipapass natin often have method definitions. Tapos, it is much convenient way to implement message handlers but allow classes to implement more flexible message handlers that enable the object to receive the method calls with arbitrary names. So, ibig sabihin, hindi siya fixed sa compile time, yung message passing. So next, we had also this a little history in PHP. So ito yung history niya. So when PHP was developed, it did not implement OO features in itself. So procedural lang siya dati. So wala pa yung hindi pa gumagamit ng mga OO. After PHP, when Ziv, Rasmus, and Andy, ayan, si Ziv, si Rasmus, at si Andy, sila yung nagre-wrote ng core and releases PHP 3. Ayan. So very basic OO features were introduced. So when PHP 4 was released, OO features get matured and huge performance improvement. But the PHP team rewrote the core engine again to introduce completely new object models and release PHP 5. Now there are two versions of PHP being developed. So don't get confused by comparing PHP versions with other languages because PHP doesn't mean it is the latest PHP version. Kasi marami pa rin tayong mga naglalabas ang mga version. So hindi yan may iwasan. Kaya kailangan is pag yung mga i-develop nila mga languages talaga is kailangan is kaya niyang mag-cook up or kaya niya, it should have the ability na ma-open sa lahat ng mga browsers. Next, we have this procedural versus OO coding system. So from here, PHP allows you to write a code in two flavors. Yan, we have this procedural, and then the object-oriented. You can even write procedural code in PHP 5 and it will run without any problems. Kaso nga lang, kahit sabihin natin wala siyang problem, pag yung system ay sobrang malaki, yan, hahanapin mo ba kung saan bang part ng system nakalagay yung code na to, yung gano'n. So, para sa akin mas maganda talaga yung object-oriented. So, in procedural programming program is divided into small parts called function. So, function lang yung sa procedural. Diba, kinocall lang natin yung function. We can create a lot of function. In object-oriented programming, program is divided into small parts called objects. So, pwede tayong mag-create ng maraming objects. So, sa mga objects na we could just call it, we could gamitan natin ng inheritance, pwede tayong mag-polymorphism sa mga ganyan, pwede natin i-instantiate, yan. In procedural programming, follows top-down approach. So, top-down. From top to the down, yung approach niya. Sa object-oriented naman, bottom-up approach. Good morning, sir. So, in procedural, there is no access specifier in procedural programming. So, wala access specifier, access modifiers. In object-oriented programming, we use private, public, or protected. Yan. So, yung private, ibig sabihin, pag wala ka na, ayaw mo nang gamitin, or gusto mo sa kanya lang yung variable na yon. Yung public, pwedeng gamitin ng lahat. Yung protected naman is may combination of the private and the public. Yun yung protected natin. And then, in procedural, adding new data and function is not easy. Totoo yun. Kasi halimbawa, pag may mga features, halimbawa sa isang system, mayroon silang gustong ipadagdag, ganyan. So, magugulo yung code mo. So, marami kang kailangang palitan, mga ganyan. Pero pagdating ng object-oriented programming, madali lang magdagdag ng data and function. Kasi pwede mong i-check na lang kung saan class ba nakasave that certain type na gusto mong i-edit. So, we also have this procedural programming does not have any proper way for hiding data. So, it is less secure. So, less secure. Hindi ka pwede mag-hide ng data. Diba? Hindi kagaya sa object-oriented. Pwede tayong mag-data hiding. Kaya yung in-example ko kanina, pwede talaga mag-data hiding sa object-oriented. So in procedural programming, overloading is not possible. Pag nag-overloading siya, mag-error na siya. Pero pagdating ng object-oriented, pwede kang mag-overloading. In procedural programming, function is more important than data. Kasi nga yung function, sila yung mga kinocall natin para mailabas natin yung laman ng mga data. So, pwede tayong magkaroon dito ng passing reference, passing by values and everything pagdating ng function. Pero sa object-oriented programming, data is more important than function. So, mas importante yung mga data. So, dito, procedural programming is based on unreal world, unreal DAO, hindi totoong world. Samantalang sa object-oriented programming, it is based on real world. Kasi dito, gumagamit na tayo ng mga noun and verbs. Diba? May mga action na dyan, may mga functionalities and everything, mga ganyan. So, dito naman kasi sa procedural, hindi tayo gumagamit din ng mga noun or verb. Alam yan nung first reporting. Ano yung sinasabi ko na noun and verb. Pagdating ng object-oriented, pagdating ng methods and attributes, di ba? Re-report nila yan later. So we also had the benefits of object-oriented programming. So since OOP is invented to make the developer's life easier, using OOP, ano yan, Marky? Meron kang sasabihin? So, continue na ako, benefits of object-oriented programming. So, OOP is invented to make the developers yung mas mapaganda or mapagaan yung buhay ng mga developer natin. Kasi sa paggamit ng object-oriented object-oriented programming, we can split the problem into smaller ones. Pwede nating hati-hatiin. Diba sabi ko nga kanina, the main goal of object-oriented is everything you want to do it via objects. Kasi yung objects natin, they are basically small discrete pieces of code which can incorporate data and behaviors together. Yun kasi yung use ng object. So in an application, all these objects are connected to each other. They share data among them and solve problems. So may mga connection kasi lahat ng mga object na yun. So object-oriented programming can be considered better from many aspects, especially when you consider the development time and maintenance overhead. And then, ito yung isa sa mga main benefits ng object-oriented programming, reusability, yung sabi ko nga kanina, para maiwasan natin yung redundancy. Yan. So, pwede natin gamitin yung mga object na yon. So, an object is an entity which has bundles of properties and methods and can interact with other objects. An object can be sufficient or it may have dependencies over other objects. But an object is usually developed to solve a specific set of problems. So when other developers suffer from the same set of problems, they can just incorporate your class to their project and use it without affecting their existing workflow. Actually, it prevents from yung don't repeat yourself. Yung dry, meaning kasi yung dry. Pagdating ng reusability, there's always the word dry. Don't repeat yourself. So in function or module programming, reusing is possible but complex. Ayan. So pwede mong gamitin yan. Pero pag ginamit mo na yung mga object na yun, doon na pumapasok yung mga sabi kanina, inheritance, magiging instantiate, yan. So, isa pang benefit ng OOP natin is refactoring. So, ano ba yung refactoring? When you need to refactor your projects, OOP gives you the maximum benefit. So, refactoring is comparatively easier because all objects are small entities and contain its properties and method as part of itself. Next is extensible. So if you need to add features to your project, you can achieve best results from OOP. And one of the core OOP feature is extensibility. It means that you can refactor your object to add the feature. While doing it, you can still maintain backward compatibility of this object so that it works fine with an old code base, mga old code base ninyo. Or you can extend the object and create a totally new object that retains all the necessary properties and methods. Or sa inheritance, kung ano yung mga pwedeng sa parent na object na pwede mong ma-derive. And then, pwede kang mag-expose ng new features. Dito pumapasok sa extensible talaga is yung inheritance. Yan. And then next naman is yung maintenance. So object-oriented programming, object-oriented code is easier to maintain because it follows somewhat strict coding conventions and is written in a self-explanatory format. So anong ibig sabihin yan? For example, when a developer extends it, so magde-debug siya. Or i-refactor niya yung system nila. So, they can easily find out the inner code structure and maintain the code time after time. So, ibig sabihin yan, whenever there is a team development environment in your project, OOP could be the solution because you can distribute your code after splitting it into small parts. So, pwede mong hati-hatiin. And then, these small parts could be developed as a separate object. So, developers can develop them almost independently and mas madali nilang mapag-merge yung mga code nila kasi mas madali na nilang mapag-merge yung ako. Di ba sinabi ko, happy-happy nila yun. Kasi nga, in every part of that system, may mga class or may mga object. So, sa'yo na yung class na to. Halimbawa, ito yung student. Yan, student. So, sa student na to, sa'yo yung object ng student na to. Ito yung object niya. Halimbawa is program, yung object niya. Ano ba yung mga nandun sa program na yun? So, sa'yo yung program na yun sa student. Ito naman yung program, sa student na to, yung information ng student. Sa'yo naman yung class na yun. So, ihati-hatiin mo na lang yun. And then, pagkatapos ng mga hati-hati, pagkatapos na yung code, you could just mix it easily. Mapag-merge mo na siya ng madali. Yun yung kagandahan ng ating object-oriented. So, next is efficiency. From the word efficiency, kailangan efficient. So, the concept of object-oriented programming is actually developed for better efficiency and ease of development process. So, maraming designs and patterns are developed to create better and efficient code. Moreover, in object-oriented, you can think of your solution in a much better approach than procedural programming. Kasi, sabi ko nga kanina, you can split the system, or pag may problema doon sa system or doon sa ginawa mong program, you could just split it into a smaller set of problems para mas madaling mahanapan yung solution na yon. And then, so that yung malaking problem na yon is mas madaling masolve. Halimbawa, pagdating yan ng fourth year, yan. So may system kayo, and you use object-oriented programming. Pumunta kayo sa client nyo, and your client wants that yung system niyo is, gusto kong palitan to, magkakaiba sila ng page or magkakaiba ng parts sa system. Pero they just given you limited time. But since you use object-oriented programming, you could just tell your group mate, okay, I will do this class and you do that class. After doing that class, I'll just copy the code and then I'll paste it here. And then pag na-merge nyo na siya, yung problem na yun, you could solve that easily. Next, we have also some basic OO terms. So, yan. So, nabanggit ko na kanina ang class. So, every time you create an object in PHP, you're actually developing the class. So, sometimes, halimbawa, if you want to name an object as a class, they are both synonyms. So, parang may pagkakawig or synonymous tawag nila. So, yun yung class natin. So, yung property naman, a property is a container inside the class which can retain some information. So, unlike other languages kasi, PHP doesn't check the type of property available. So, yung a property could be accessible only in class itself, by its subclass, or by everyone. So, ibig sabihin yan, yung property ng variable na yan can be declared inside the class itself, but not inside any function in that class. So, yung methods naman, yan yung i-report nila mamaya. Methods are function inside a class, like properties. Methods can also be accessible by those types of users. Hintayin ko na lang mamaya kung anong explanation nila yan. So, yung encapsulation, I already mentioned before, it means that yung magbabind together, binding together, and then wrapping up of data and methods into a single unit na tinatawag nila class. And then the benefit of encapsulation also is that it perform the task inside without making you worry. So yun yung kagandahan po ng encapsulation natin. So I already also mentioned polymorphism before. Ang polymorphism, sabihin na natin that objects could be in any type. So pagdating ng discrete object, it can have also a discrete properties and methods which works separately to other objects. So, however, a set of objects could be derived from a parent object and retain some properties of the parent class. So, this process is called polymorphism. So, yung ibig sabihin niyan, yung object natin can be morphed into several other objects retaining some of its behavior. Yan. So, yung inheritance naman, yung namamana, yan. So, when you inherit an object from another object, the subclass derives all the properties and methods of that superclass. So, kung ano yung mga gusto niyang manahin, mamamana niya. So, a subclass can then be processed each method of superclass anyway. So, Diyan naman pumapasok yung overriding pagdating ng ating inherit. So, meron din tayong coupling. Coupling, di ba? Couple. Pair. Ayan. So, coupling is the behavior of how classes are dependent on each other. So, nagdedepende sila sa dalawa. So, loosely coupled architecture is much more usable than tightly coupled objects. So, yung coupling is a very important concern for designing better objects. Kasi, pag may behavior sila na pwedeng gamitin ng bawat isa. So, nagdedepende sila sa bawat isa. So, yung design patterns naman natin, using design patterns can increase the performance of your whole application with minimal code written by developers. Sometimes, it is not possible to design optimized solution without using design patterns. But unnecessary and unplanned use of DP can also degrade the performance of your application. So, kailangan, pag nag-design kayo kailangan na well-planned talaga siya and well-designed para hindi ma-degrade yung performance ng gagawin yung application or ng system. So, ang subclass naman, it is a very common term in object-oriented because when an object is derived from another object, the derived one is called the subclass of which it is derived from. And then, we also have the superclass. Super, di ba kanina sub? So, super, siya yung mas mataas, and then we also have the subclass. So, superclass is a class to an object if the object is derived from it. Ibig sabihin, when you extend an object, the object which you are extending is the superclass of the newly extended object. Yun yung ibig sabihin po ng superclass. And then instance. Yan. So, nag-instantiate. When you instantiate, so whenever you create an object, by calling its constructor, it will be called an instant. An instant of the class. Sabi niya ganyan. Yun yung ibig niyan sabihin. So, example niyan is yung dollar variable natin. Then, gumawa siya ng bagong object. Next, malapit na matapos. Ready na po yung mga reporters ha. So, general coding conventions. So, these coding conventions will help you to maintain your application at a large extent. So also it will increase the maintainability of your code. Yeah. It will also help you to write efficient code by avoiding duplicity and redundant objects. Yun kasi po yung na object-oriented. To avoid redundancy and duplicity of objects. And last but not the least, it will make your code much more readable. So, ito yung general coding conventions natin. In a single PHP file, we never write more than one class at a time. Out of the scope of that class, we will not write any procedural code. So, hindi po tayo gagamit ng procedural. Gagamit po tayo, papasok na din yung this, paggamit ng mga this, yan, yung mga methods, yan. So, we will save any class with proper naming convention. So, for example, if you want to save a file, yan. So gagamitin natin yung halimbawa is gagawa ka ng isang class, yan. Kailangan yung naming convention niya is yung madali mong maintindihan. That certain class is alam mo na para talaga sa kanya. So kailangan meron siyang connection. Yan. So never mix the case in file names. It creates ugly application structure. Go ahead with all small letters. Yan yung camel case. Diba? Yung camel case natin, kailangan yung mga letters natin is all, unless you want to add. Diba yung camel case, we have this camel case and then the camel case natin, every first letter of each word in that complex word is capitalized. Pero pagdating po ng ating camel case, kasi ang tawag natin dyan is medial capitals. Yung practice na yan is writing phrases without spaces or punctuation and indicating the separation of words with a single capitalized letter. So, bahala ka na kung saan ilalagay yung capitalized letter niya, either sa first word or dun sa second word. Pero pwede rin na lahat is naka-small letter. So, while writing the name, of properties or class variables, we will follow the same convention. So, mas maganda talaga na naka-camel case convention tayo. And then, while writing the name of a method, we will start with a smaller letter and then the rest are camel case. Ay, wala na yan. Activities. Post ko na lang yan later. So, wala na po. Hanggang dun lang po. Naka-ready na po ba yung ating mga reporters? Ready na ba? I'll be stopping my presentation para sa inyo na. Ayun na yung panonoodin namin. But let me stop the recording and then I'll be creating a new record para sa reports.